How did this come about?
I was reading some historic accounts of different communities in this kind of eastern section of Morrison County, and this name had come up, and I hadn't seen it on any other map or document previously, so I wanted to learn what I could, and I started learning that it didn't last very long. It was maybe gone by like 1907, 1910. So it was a late 19th century, very, very early 20th century settlement. And the counts that I could see were very, very vague. They were saying it's a few miles north and east of these other places that we do know the location of. So I wanted to see if I could pin it down more precisely with some other references and documentation.
We did meet Horst Hanneken, and Horst Hanneken is an author of a few Morrison County town and township books. We obtained copies of Horst's books, and in there was a couple, 3 ghost towns that were detailed in the book, and one of those was Dixville. From the book, we were able to determine where that ghost town was located, and we arranged to talk to Horst at the town site, as well as where some of those buildings were relocated. During the discovery phase of trying to figure out, Fred and I were trying to figure out where Dixville was located. This is before we had met Horst, but we had a copy of his book. Ironically, the map of Dixville is upside down, so it's very difficult to figure out exactly where it was located. And so what we determined, I had found an obituary for somebody who had lived in the town and talked about town was about a half mile or so west of where the church and cemetery were located. And so we realized quickly, because of that description, the map was upside down. And it also helped us pinpoint the location of the town, which was at a crossroads of 2 major county roads.
My name is Horst Hanneken. We are standing at the site of a former Buckman Township town that existed from 1895 to 1913, the town of Dixville. The only thing in modern times we remember of it is the little country Lutheran church that's a half mile east of here. But this was the site of the town of Dixville right here on the corner. And Dixville was started in 1895 by Gottlieb Schultz, who was a traveling salesman, like a Watkins salesman. There were really no roads here, just dirt trails. And the people that lived here had no access to towns, and they needed dry goods, they needed notions, they needed sundries of all kinds, they needed patent medicines. And he and his horse Dick and his little wagon traveled all these little dirt roads for years, bringing needed goods to the early homesteaders. And he had 2 really wet years in 1893 and 4 and decided he didn't want to do that anymore. He picked this spot because it's kind of in the center of where his most successful clients were. He built a store in April of 1895, and the store was right over here in the corner. It was a 2-story false front building with living quarters upstairs and a meeting hall, which a lot of the country stores had back then because there was no place else for people to gather. For voting, for inoculations, for whatever the locals needed. That was the start of Dixville. It's named after, Gottlieb Schultz wanted to get a government contract for a mail drop box so that mail could be delivered here for all locals to pick up, because there wasn't any rural delivery yet. And he had to have the name of a town. He's looking out the window of his store, and here's his favorite horse, Dick, that had taken him all over the country, according to legend. So he named it after Dick, Dixville. Well, somebody in Washington found out they already had a town named that, so they just they made it sound the same and changed the CKS to an X. So that's where Dixville got its name. Right here in the corner, a guy by the name of John Russell built a creamery in 1898. And he added an ice house to it. It was a cheese factory. It was also, he had cream separators in there for the local farmers. So there's a creamery built right here. And then right next to it was a blacksmith shop. That came in 1898. 1899, Carl Greenwald built that. And he took on a young apprentice who lived about a mile and a half east of here named Peter Hound. And by 1903, Peter Hound, at the age of 21, 22, bought the place and kept the blacksmith shop going. And south of there was another general store that a farmer who lived up here where that silo and barn is, a guy by the name of Peter Britz, he built a store for his daughter. So she wanted to get into that kind of stuff, and he wanted access to the goods, so he built a store for her. And her name was Edith Ida Britz. Well, Peter Hound, the blacksmith, and Edith Ida Britz got to know each other, and by 1911 they got married. And again, in 1912, that store burnt down. So some of the farmers, I don't know if they had an issue with the creamery owner or not. I'm not sure what the deal was. That's never been in print. But they decided to form their own creamery. And they decided to pick up the Crossroads. And then when that store burnt down, this creamery's going to pieces. Peter Hound and his wife, Ida Britz, decided to move their stores to Little Rock, because that was going to be the new community. This was gone. They roll those on pine logs in March of 1913.
Wow.
They roll those down to the next intersection. That's a mile and a half.
Yeah.
And then a mile into Little Rock. And then she ran her store. Well, Peter Hound ran his blacksmith shop until probably around 1960.
Wow. Were there any other buildings nearby you wanted to
right
speak
here
about
on
or
the
point
corner,
to? Okay.
right north of us,
Okay.
was District 18 School.
Right.
Now, that was first built in 1886. So they formed that in 1886, and there's references that they met in homes first, but then they met in the 1886 schoolhouse.
Okay.
And I remember the school sitting here. It was torn down about 1960. It was right here in the corner.
Yeah, we
'Cause I
have
remember
pictures
I
of
was
that.
here when they started tearing it down. Salvaged the
Wow.
lumber on it.
Wow.
We are standing in the village of Little Rock, and behind me are two historic buildings that originally made up the town of Dixville. The first one behind me is the old blacksmith shop. It does have a cement block addition to the east. That was put on in the 40s. But the original blacksmith shop that you see, it hasn't been used for 60 years. So it's been in ruins for a while. But it's an original historic building from the town. And again, that was built in 1898, 1899. Moved here in 1913 in April. And the building behind was the original Ida Britz general store that was located in Dixville. That was moved here too. By 1913, Dixville was falling apart after the fire of the Keir store, and they moved their buildings here because over to my left, a new creamery was built. And by 1921-22, they built a big feed store with a community center on top of it. Those have been torn down in the last 10 years as well. The store, Ida Britz ran that until 1922. And then her brother, John, and brother-in-law, Fred Kowitz, bought it from her. And they ran it until 1947 in partnership. They hauled cattle. They had ice houses. They did everything back then throughout the 30s to make a living. But it sustained two families. And in 1947, they split, and John Britz bought a store in Buckman that was up for sale. And he ran that until 1960 when his son took over, and that was Britz Market into 1979 when it burned down, and Britz rebuilt. And that was in the Britz family until the late 1980s. And it's where the Buckman hardware store is today.
It's fitting they're still side by side, just like they were in Dixville, right?
Yes. The store is still in great shape.
Wow. Oh, that's good to
You
know.
could take a couple walls out and open it up again today.